Good evening. I am the narrator, and welcome to my parlor. Tonight's story is Evanescent. Growing up, my family never stayed in one place for long. We moved constantly, so I learned not to grow attached to places. Blame my father's job. It didn't change. Best I could tell, it stayed the same. But where he worked did. I never knew what it was, only that it involved paper, pencils, and extended phone calls heard faintly through closed doors. It took us to a variety of places, all different yet all the same. Some were big, others small. Some were new, others old. Some were rich, others poor. But my experience of them was the same. Again, staying briefly, not growing attached. As such, I have few memories, and those I do are scattered and remote. I find them only with great time and effort, and even then I wonder why. They're always dim and faded, their details lost to time. There is one exception. In addition to father and I, there was also my mother and my brother. My father did his job and little else. He always seemed lethargic, detached from his surroundings, like they had nothing to offer, or if they did, he was too tired to enjoy them. Mothers did what mothers do, and was paid what mothers are. She was not the best, but did her best, and we did our best to ensure she knew. Even father. My brother was younger than me. In their absence, he answered to me. Usually I just dismissed him. They should have known. So there we were in our cloistered van. Father had been called that morning by the man he called Boss. I never met Boss, so I assumed it was his name. Though I hadn't heard the call, I knew its gist. His job had moved. He had to move or lose it. That was not an option, so we moved. The trip was nothing special. We arrived on time with the usual excitement. Our new home was small, with just enough space for each of us. We settled as quickly as we could. Then, with nothing else to do, we dispersed to our rooms. I laid in bed and stared out the window, having stood it there to do just that. In most places we lived, the outside was more interesting than the inside. This, I thought, might prove the exception. I stared at the moon and stars where they always were. I stared down at the sidewalk, the same that existed everywhere, though at that hour it was empty. I stared at the buildings, brick with flat tops, shuttered doors, and black windows. On each was the business's name, but I couldn't read them in darkness. Slowly I drifted to sleep. The next morning we would awake and our schedules would resume. When I woke, my room was dingy and discolored. It was the first time I'd seen it lit. My brother slept soundly, his complaints pending. It was to me to wake him, a task I always postponed. My interest was the buildings. I'd seen them only at night and had seen little. What else had daylight to show me? Little, it seemed. Little more than before, and I don't just mean the night before. There were like many I had lived by, businesses selling mediocre items at exorbitant prices. They seemed open. Their lights were on but dim. Customers came and went, but were few and far between. I looked up and saw the sun was dim, peeking amongst dense clouds, as if debating whether to appear. The sky was gray, though it was not particularly cold. I looked to the end of the block, but couldn't see past it. I got up, passing my sleeping sibling. The den, the bland odor of mother's cooking. Father was already gone. Good morning, as we said each morning. As for breakfast, I would return to it later. Knowing the temperature would scarcely affect its taste, I went to the front door. The knob was tight and rigid, though we'd nothing worth stealing. Still, it opened, and I stepped out onto the sidewalk. There, I looked left and right. Both seemed to continue on and on. I turned and began to walk, studying my surroundings. There was everything a neighborhood would need: a laundromat, a dry cleaning service, oddly, two separate businesses, a grocer, a liquor store, a cobbler. Pedestrians were scant and passed me with disinterest. This I preferred, knowing to avoid strangers. At block's end, I could either turn for more of the same or visit the park across the street. Naturally, I picked the latter. But first, I waited and watched for traffic. Nothing came, then nothing came, then nothing and nothing came. If it weren't for the junker that rattled past me, I would have just proceeded, and could have without incident. The park didn't impress. The grass was gray and withered. The swings hung from rusted chains affixed to rusted pipes, waiting for the wind to move them slightly. Beside them stood two wooden ducks, the sort one rode back and forth. Clearly no one had for some time. Their paint had chipped and faded, revealing specks of what was once yellow and, on the beaks, orange. Still, they smiled as if they liked it. They smiled at me, their eyes empty black circles, and I smiled back. It was the least I could do. Beyond them stood the pavilion, with 2 wooden tables beneath. I was about to go until a sudden detail deterred me. Distant footsteps. I paused. This may not have been a waste after all. The steps sounded like a child's, a meek child's. This was soon confirmed. He appeared beside the pavilion, clung to the wall, and peered around, as if afraid he was being watched. At last he saw me. He approached sheepishly, and I saw him in detail. He was younger than I. His clothes were ragged and unfit for the weather. His hair seemed to have never seen a comb, and he stared at me as if I was at all interesting. I wasn't. "Yes?" I asked. He opened his mouth, but his lips soon pursed. "You had something to say?" I prompted, softly, so as not to intimidate him. He slowly opened his mouth again, as if with great effort. He did form a word, or at least some structured sound. "I'm sorry, you opened your mouth, but no sound came out," I told him. Was he mute? Why was he alone? Like me, he was too young to be. Just then, he at last said something. It was faint, quiet, but I heard. "Did you say something?" "I heard something, and you're the only one standing near me, and so I assume you just said something." I asked and explained. He nodded slowly. "Well, could you say it again? I'm afraid I missed it." He spoke, slowly, faintly. I listened. Hearing and listening differ. Perhaps it mattered. "Evanescent." "Evanescent?" I asked. He nodded again, slowly and evenly. What, pray tell, did he fear? "What is—" "I'll show you." He turned from the pavilion. I followed at a distance. We passed it and through the park. On the other hand, the neighborhood resumed. "Is it here?" I asked. "Follow," he told me. I followed, only out of curiosity. The street was abandoned. On the other side, the brick resumed. The streets and buildings were empty. Their windows were dark entirely. There, however, the distinction was subtle. "Why is this section abandoned?" I asked. "Abandoned?" he asked, after a protracted pause. Did he even know the term? I declined to define or clarify it, or whatever he sought. His answer would likely be glib and useless. Besides, I could find it on my own. We continued. The windows, like great black eyes, stared at me. I, ever polite, stared back. "What were you? What happened?" I asked them. They didn't respond. At long last, we reached an alley. Its end was dark and indistinct, dissolving into the atmosphere. I had nothing to say. For the first time, I was genuinely fascinated, and not simply humoring him. He turned and entered. I followed. The alley narrowed as we went. When we reached the end, if it was the end, he paused and turned to me. "Is this it?" I asked. He turned and pointed to the wall. I looked, and there it was, Evanescent. Printed on the top, the letters a color I couldn't identify, and which seemed to change in the turning of the sun. It didn't seem like chalk, ink, or spray paint, yet there it was. "Evanescent," I spelled aloud. He nodded. "Is this it?" I asked. He nodded. Failing to see my question had changed definition. I meant, "Is this it? As in, is this all you had to show me? Are we done?" He stared blankly. He seemed either not to know what to do or did, but hesitated. At last he turned and began heading back. Confused, I followed. We came to the head of the alley. There, the window stared at me, and I stared back, again. My question was yet unanswered. "I have to go," I told him. Normally, I would have said it was nice to meet you, but I was unsure if he'd even comprehend. My vocabulary was limited, and what few words I had I couldn't waste. I turned for my home and didn't look back. He may have watched, maybe not. I passed the park and returned home. The door opened, lighter this time, and I stepped in. There I heard my brother complaining of our room and its condition. He'd likely just awoken. My meal lingered on the kitchen table. I made quick work of it. Soon the door opened again. Father, his trudge, his briefcase. The sky darkened, and my brother and I retired. We laid again in our room. He dozed off quickly, his mind empty. I hadn't the luxury. Again I peered through the window, from the rooftops to the bottoms of the buildings, from those on the left to those on the right. I sought details I could have missed in daylight. My eyes were about to close when something caught them. On a distant wall were markings. My eyes adjusted. I couldn't read them. I couldn't even tell what they were. Were they written or sprayed? Ink, paint, or chalk? Evanescent. Then I felt a presence, as if something were nearby, something I didn't recognize. There was nothing in the sky and nothing within the windows, so I peered directly downward. There was the boy in the same clothes, gazing up at me. I didn't know if he could see me, though I liked to believe he couldn't. His lips moved, though again made no sound. I drew my curtains, laid down, and closed my eyes. Though unnerved, I needed sleep. When I awoke, the sky was gray. What passed for daytime had returned. But had he? I sat up and gazed downward. The scene was the same as the day before. Strangers trudged along the sidewalks. Luckily, the boy was not among them. I gazed back up and withdrew into my room. There I saw the wall where I'd earlier seen the inscription. Strangely, it was gone, like it had been scrubbed off. Simple graffiti, I dismissed. Then I rose, and the morning before reprised. My brother slept, mother cooked. Father wrote at an office I had never been nor seen. I passed through the kitchen and stepped outside. There was the brick maze. I peered through a window and saw a clerk and customer, then crossed the street to the front door. Its knob was tight like ours. Inside was a bevy of shelves and items. They all seemed used, though priced as new. The customer walked past me, a brown bag beneath his arm. I believe the clerk saw me, but he didn't greet me. I was about to go when suddenly I saw in the corner a small figure in ragged clothes with unkempt hair. Not again. I realized then he was no he at all. There was more than one. I hastened out. Naturally, she hastened with, but vanished quickly to my relief. Not wanting her to know my address, I turned to the park and soon arrived, as did she. I folded my arms. I ceded defeat and would hear what they had to tell me. Yes, I groaned. They simply stood and stared. Without a sound, a third appeared from behind a tree, and a fourth from behind the swings, and a fifth from behind the pavilion, as the first had the day before, and more, and more. What do you need of me? I asked. The girl parted her lips, slowly and haltingly like the boy, and began to perform a word. Damn it! I thought, having tired of this word, whatever it was, whatever it referred to. They seemed to move without moving, to fade, but the term still rang in my ears. I turned and retreated home. Sounds and images swirled through my mind. My brother's snores, mother's cooking, father's unending work, the suitcases opening and closing, and the grinding wheels that brought us from place to place. The distance grew. I stood outside amidst the maze. The sky was black, save for a faint, distant moon. I peered through their windows. They were empty, as were the streets. It was as it was when I peered through my window, except I stood amongst it. I set forth, having no reason to be inside. I paused at the corner, not knowing why. There I peered left and right, again not knowing why. Then I continued across the street, saw movement in the corner of my eye, and paused. In the distance stood a small, disheveled figure. Ugh. Of course, it appeared ahead of me. In a second to my side, the first reappeared and joined them. There I was in the black sea, tiny shapes breaking slightly its monotony. Yes? I asked. We warned you, they declared as one. You warned me? There was no audible response, only the sense I was correct. I barreled forth, further from them. They made no attempt to block me. In fact, they didn't move at all. We warned you. I moved through them knowing they were watching, but I didn't look back. Eventually, I came to the abandoned buildings from earlier, looking just as they had then. Evanescent. I turned and saw nothing, then turned and continued, not knowing where, not knowing from what. The windows somehow seemed emptier than before. I turned a corner, not sure which. There I saw in the corner of my eye a figure. There was nothing distinct to see or say. Maybe it was approaching, maybe it wasn't. Evanescent. I glanced over my shoulder. The figure was gone, but I hastened nonetheless. I stepped and stepped, still not knowing where. Perhaps my surroundings were familiar, perhaps they weren't. I stopped stepping. I could no longer. There was no more space to step to. So instead, I stepped aside. Evanescent. There they were again. The letters on the wall. There he was in the corner of my eye. I peered forth. Again, I didn't look back. Perhaps it was there, perhaps it wasn't. I stepped forth. The wall was gone. As I moved, they flickered in my mind. I forged ahead. There were no more bricks, no more walls or turrets, only darkness all around. In the corners of both my eyes, the figure reappeared. Evanescent. Before, I couldn't tell if I'd been followed. Now I'd no doubt. I hastened. He hastened. As we went, faces flickered in my mind, theirs and those of adults I'd never seen before. I knew what I was seeing. He knew what I was seeing. I knew he knew, and we hadn't even spoken. Evanescent. By then, I could say it myself. More and more passed through my mind, and I cared only to see three. Ahead was a small dim light. Behind me was the one called Evanescent. We spoke without speaking, heard without hearing. Our time is short, as is yours. I reached the light, which wasn't a light at all, but the absence of a darkness through which I'd walked. I walked through it. It glowed from the sky. Beneath it was the maze. At the end of the block stood our home. At the head was the boy. I passed him and nodded. He nodded and seemed to pass me. Our door was already open. I stepped in and it closed behind me. There they were, sound asleep.